In a routine stop gone awry, a seasoned officer arrests a young black boy, only to desperately need his help minutes later. What turns a simple arrest into a life-changing crisis? It's a gripping tale of prejudice, panic, and pivotal realizations that challenge everything an officer thought he stood for. Today, Officer Daniel Rivers pushed his shopping cart down the brightly lit aisle of Harper's Market, squinting at the crumpled list in his hand. His wife's careful handwriting listed the week's groceries in neat rows, but Rivers still found himself muttering under his breath. After 25 years on the force, he had perfected the art of running errands before his shifts. It was easier than doing it after a long day of patrolling. "Peanut butter," he murmured, scanning the shelves under the hum of fluorescent lights. The freshly pressed uniform he wore felt stiff, and his badge gleamed under the harsh lighting as he reached for a jar. The weight of his utility belt was a constant reminder that he was never really off duty, even during mundane tasks. Rivers checked his watch, still 40 minutes before his shift began. "Plenty of time," he muttered, steering the cart toward the bread aisle. Other shoppers milled about, a mother with a baby in tow, a teenager scrolling on his phone, an older man examining canned soup. Rivers nodded politely as he passed, his demeanor professional and calm. As he reached for a loaf of whole-grain bread, a loud crash echoed through the store. The sound of raised voices followed, sharp and frantic. Rivers froze, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster. He didn't draw his weapon but stayed alert, listening carefully. The commotion came from the electronics section several aisles over, accompanied by the sound of merchandise hitting the floor. Rivers abandoned his cart and strode toward the noise. "Stay back," he ordered the curious onlookers, his voice firm but measured. Years of experience dictated his movements as he approached the scene, his senses heightened. Turning the corner, he spotted a boy, no older than 14, backed against a shelf of phone accessories, clutching a backpack. His school uniform was neatly pressed, but fear flickered in his wide eyes as he looked around. Surrounding him were the store manager and 2 employees, their faces tense and accusatory. "What's going on here?" Rivers demanded, his voice carrying authority. The manager, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, stepped forward. "Officer, thank goodness. We caught this kid stealing headphones," he said, pointing toward the boy. He put them in his bag. The boy shook his head vehemently. "I didn't take anything," he protested, his voice trembling but steady. "I was just looking around." "Looking suspicious," one of the employees interjected, crossing his arms. "He's been wandering for almost an hour, watching us like he's trying to see what he can grab." "I was waiting for my mom to finish her shift," the boy said, his voice cracking. "She works at the pharmacy across the street. I come here after school because it's quiet, and I can study." Rivers frowned. The boy's bag looked heavy with books, and his uniform was clean and tidy, but years of ingrained judgment clouded his perception. "Let me see your bag," he ordered. The boy hesitated. "I didn't take anything. It's just my books." "Then you won't mind showing me," Rivers said, stepping closer. He wasn't unkind, but his tone left little room for argument. The boy reluctantly handed over the backpack, his hands shaking slightly. Rivers unzipped the bag and pulled out the contents. Textbooks, a notebook, and pens spilled onto the floor. At the bottom, tucked beneath a folder, was a boxed set of expensive wireless headphones. The price tag glinted under the lights. "Explain this," Rivers said, holding up the box. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not mine. I don't know how it got there," he stammered. "I swear, I didn't put that in my bag." The employees exchanged knowing looks, and the manager crossed his arms. "We've had problems with theft before," he said. He probably thought he could slip it in unnoticed. "I didn't take it," the boy insisted, tears brimming in his eyes. "Check the cameras. Someone must have put it there." Rivers ignored his plea, pulling out his handcuffs. "Turn around," he said. "Please, call my mom," the boy begged. "She'll tell you I'm not like that." "Turn around," Rivers repeated more firmly. He snapped the cuffs on the boy's wrists, his protests fading into quiet, defeated sobs. As Rivers led the boy toward the front of the store, he noticed how other shoppers averted their eyes. A few teenagers pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The boy kept his head down, his shoulders shaking as tears fell silently. "Just wait till we get to the station." Rivers muttered, ignoring the knot of discomfort forming in his stomach. Before they could reach the exit, a deafening bang echoed through the store. Rivers instinctively pulled the boy behind a nearby shelf, his hand flying to his weapon. The sound was followed by shouting near the registers. "Everyone on the ground!" a voice barked. Another gunshot shattered the air, sending customers into a panic. Rivers peeked around the shelf, spotting two masked men near the cash registers. One brandished a gun, while the other stuffed cash into a bag. Customers crouched on the floor, trembling, as the gunman waved his weapon threateningly. "Stay here," Rivers whispered to the boy. He reached for his radio, only to realize it was in his patrol car outside. The boy's voice was barely audible. "You can't leave me here." Rivers glanced at him, taking in the fear etched across his face. For a moment, the officer hesitated. Then he nodded. "Stay close." Together, they crept toward the back of the store, keeping low. The boy's handcuffs clinked softly as he moved, and Rivers winced at the sound. They found temporary shelter behind a display of canned goods, the boys breathing shallow and panicked. "I need you to stay calm," Rivers said quietly, his tone softer than before. "We'll get out of this." The boy nodded, his wide eyes never leaving Rivers' face. The robbers shouted for the manager to empty the safe, their agitation growing. Rivers knew he needed to act quickly before someone got hurt, but his options were limited. Without backup, disarming two armed men was a risky gamble. As he considered his next move, the boy spoke. "I can help." Rivers frowned. "How?" "I know this store," the boy said quickly. "There's an emergency exit near the stockroom. If we can get there, we can call for help." Rivers hesitated, then nodded. "All right, lead the way." They moved cautiously, weaving through the aisles. Rivers kept his gun drawn, his senses on high alert. When they reached the stockroom, Rivers found the emergency phone on the wall. He handed the receiver to the boy. "Dial 911, he instructed. The boy did as he was told, his hands still cuffed. He relayed their location to the dispatcher, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Rivers watched, a strange mix of guilt and admiration building in his chest. When the boy finished the call, Rivers gently gripped his shoulder. "You did good," he said. Minutes later, the wail of sirens filled the air. The robbers panicked, their shouts turning frantic as they realized the police had arrived. Rivers and the boy stayed hidden until officers stormed the store, disarming the gunman and taking control of the scene. As paramedics and officers swarmed the store, Rivers uncuffed the boy, his hands shaking slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake." The boy stared at him, his expression unreadable. "Call my mom," he said finally. Rivers nodded, pulling out his phone. As he dialed, he felt the weight of his actions settle heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one mistake, it was about years of assumptions, biases, and the consequences they carried. When the boy's mother arrived, she hugged her son tightly, her eyes red with tears. Rivers approached her, his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, I owe you and your son an apology," he said. "I made a snap judgment, and I was wrong." She looked at him, her expression hard but not unkind. "You need to do better," she said simply. Rivers nodded, the words cutting deeper than any reprimand he'd ever received. Later, as he sat in his patrol car outside the store, Rivers replayed the day's events in his mind. The boy's courage in the face of fear, his willingness to help despite everything, it forced Rivers to confront the flaws in his own perspective. He realized this wasn't just about changing how he did his job. It was about changing how he saw the world. In the weeks that followed, Rivers took steps to address his biases. He enrolled in additional training programs, joined community outreach efforts, and shared his story with fellow officers. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild trust with himself, with the community, and most importantly, with the young boy whose life he had so profoundly impacted.